Being around you people and being around myself and being around Kairoot and seeing you people out there on tape in the future. Some of you will be seeing this in some of you will be September 1991, but I see you. And I know that this at times sounds strange, but let me repeat. The point of this is not to be strange, the point of this is not philosophy, and the point of this is not for me to conjure up unbelievable schematics, philosophies, and imaginary structures, although I can do that with my hands asleep, with my brain behind me. I can do that half asleep, my hands behind me. The whole idea of what seems to be information along these lines is stuff that I pull from somewhere else, or that I've even pointed out in a sense I have to make up, because it does not exist here. It does not exist verbally, it does not exist in the yellow circuit. The reality of it cannot be experienced in such a way that is meaningful to man. It is not that people do not, in what I call the red circuit, the blue circuit. It is not that people physically or emotionally do not experience a wider range of reality, because they do. They always have. Where do you think the dreams of metaphysics and extraordinary states and some of religion comes from? They do experience it, but they can't talk about it. Oh, I know, it doesn't stop them. And once they start talking about it, is when you're dealing with, I think it's known as Purina, some places, pig chow. You can't do anything with it. There is no verbal information available, and therefore that's part of my responsibility, is to conjure it up, is to try and give some kind of reasonably expected, comprehensible map in words, pointing to a place that does not exist in 3D consciousness. Right at the basis of that, these kind of structures, is the reality behind me pointing out that there are three forces. Life has had people pointing this out for thousands of years, not in the same way I have been, and things were not as they are now, and I have refined it, I have seen it my own way, and etc. The information is slightly different. The reality is the same. Ordinary consciousness sees everything as having 2 feet. Got 2 eyes, everything has a top, everything has a bottom, everything has a right hand, a left hand, and that seems quite adequate to run the world as it is. Now there's more running the world, but through the yellow circuits, through the human mind, that seems to explain sufficiently. To a few people it does not explain sufficiently, such as you can get just absolutely stopped somewhere along the line if you have been born 500 BC or if you were born in 1945. You may have gotten stopped at the point of feeling, that is, down somewhere beyond the yellow circuits, a feeling that there was some basic goodness to life, that there was some positive aspect, that life may be moving in a positive manner, and yet there seems to be, you're surrounded by people saying there is, and some of your own genes seems to be agreeing that, wow, things are terrible. People are horrible individually, and put together, they're unbelievably horrible. And that life is obviously going right down the old commode. And that seems to be totally lacking. A person cannot seem to develop in some special way. And no priest, no rabbi, no ordinary parent can tell them otherwise. It's just the things you should do, things you shouldn't do. The things you should believe in, and things you should fight against. It takes, I'm still in the preface, it takes not the theoretical acceptance of me saying there are 3 forces running everything, whatever I've been calling them, ABC, the Northwest and South Force. They do not exist independently, but they are behind everything of which you can be ordinarily conscious. Citic consciousness requires, if anything has a characteristic, if anything exists, you can see. Not way down the road and not after I die, but if you're going to stick with this and I stick with you, it is possible that you begin to have a growing awareness, not theoretical, it's not philosophy, a growing awareness that begins to affect the way you see and the way you behave, that what you perceive ordinarily to be going on between you and other people, between other people and other people, always is obvious, no matter what it's called, is obviously 2 forces. When it's 2 people, there you got the beginning of 2 forces, and then you got a person that's a pretty good person, or a pretty intelligent person. Then you got a person who is a pretty conservative, a retro person, a dumb person. And of course when you got you and somebody else, no sense even going into that, The battle lines are drawn, the numbers are on the uniforms, and you do not need a program because you know. It takes the kind of information and then the kind of trickery and deceit and pushing and pulling and slapping you around the head that you begin, if you belong here, you begin to have an awareness first. It can take all 2 or 3 hours, days, months, maybe a little longer, that yes, that is true. Not because you said it, but I can begin to feel it, that no. And on a good day you might go, comma, no. Binary basis of explaining anything will do. I don't care what it is. I don't care if you apparently grew up in a culture, that you grew up individually, and you were a real fervent blank, Baptist, Christian of some kind, that yes, there is good and yes, there is evil. That, just disregard the fact of whether there's invalidity to that. That's not the end of the song. Somebody has given you 2 lines of a poem, 2 verses of a song, and of course then the rest of the world, the so-called thinkers, philosophers, theologians, have been fighting over, wait a minute, this does not wash. Our yellow circuits, the human brain cannot make sense out of this. And since I am not a theologian, I will just hit and run and point out to you again, I guess the classic verbal description of this is the old idea throughout the planet Earth at all times about, hey, there's got to be some kind of good force behind this. Or it's widely referred to as the gods. But if that be true, then how can all this non-goodness be going on? And St. Augustine scratches his head and decides, you know, maybe I'll just move on down to Daytona. Get out of Hippo at least. All of these other theologians, including you, your mother, if you thought about it, cannot make sense of it. And all they can come up with is this good old thing. Man was not meant to know. Now, if you belong in this, that should strike you, at least after having met me now, as being extraordinarily topographically pregnant. Why is man given such a hunger? And then the wisest thinkers in these areas throughout history will tell you, all right, here's the answer to this thing. You're real hungry and you traveled all this time to see me and you read all my books. That's great. And your question, I bet I know it, but go ahead and tell me. And sure enough, how, if there's goodness behind all this, a positive force behind the universe, how can all this meanness, this mean-spirited, this pettiness can be going on? The priest says, the great writer, he says, I already wrote it down in my hand here. I knew what you're going to ask. So that was it, right? And you go, wow, it's a miracle. I'm at the right place. What's the answer? He said, the answer is, man can't understand it. Man will never know. Of course, some of you may be, you know, why I didn't see you for a while when you were having to surrender your time, if you were a good person, in reform school after what you did to that priest. It should strike you as being topographically extremely interesting. Why is such a curiosity, such a need placed in man, so much so that these so-called recognized spiritual intellectual leaders already know what's going to be the question, and their answer is, we can't know. That is curious. That is strange. Beyond the yellow circuit, beyond a binary, beyond just what's strange or it's not strange. It's strange into another dimension. It should begin, at least now that you're around this, that you begin to have this feel that all the information readily available is not sufficient. Something is lacking. This does not make sense. Not the fact that the human mind can't seem to comprehend how can there be goodness behind all this and then all this little petty stuff, all this meanness. Not that. The whole world says that doesn't make sense. You got to be better than that. What shouldn't make sense, what should be curious, is that can't be so. That would be just the height of wasted effort. What purpose is it serving anybody to have that as being a historical, a continuing, apparent motivation, drive, curiosity in man, and the epitome of the intellectual, respected answers is this? They can change it around from generation to generation, but they've been saying the same thing now for 5,000 years. The answer from the head priest, the head duck, the main cigar is here to give you the answer, and the answer is, hey, it's good that you people have these questions. It shows that you're my kind of little followers. You know, bless all you people, whoever it was, Egyptians, Mesopotamians. It's great that you have such a curiosity, and it's good you came to me because I am the big you-know-what. All right, the answer is, man wasn't meant to know. Man was not meant to know, in a sense, anything on the binary basis, because you are dealing with less than a complete picture. Beyond me talking about it, as I said, it's not a philosophy, it's not a theory, it's not really just an intellectual structure. It's got to begin to have some effect on you. You've got to already have the potential in your own molecular structure that it begins to strike you absolutely on a continuing basis. It just comes upon you that whatever seems to be your attempted insight into some problem, no matter what it is, that given all ordinary conditions, the information readily available is insufficient. Not your fault, it's the same for everybody, including all the big cheeses and the big cigars in the city. It's the same for everybody. One of the basics of it is in the beginning to try and remember some of this. At least just remember three forces. There's a triad, there's three legs to everything. Humans are not staying on two legs, humans are not seeing with two eyes, humans are not thinking with a brain that has a left and a right hand side. There is, and it's observable. You can do it. You can do it this side of some kind of great mystical state. Of course, you're already weird and a little mystical to be involved with this. But what I'm saying is, this is just kind of the kindergarten to get to that point. That there are three supports to everything going on. There is a triad. There is a three-note chord. There are three legs supporting everything, no matter how fast. If I am conscious of it, if I personally spot something just for a second and it disappears, there were three blanks behind that, three forces, we'll call it for the time being still. And you do not ever, you or anybody else, consciously perceive of, think of more than two. Two is all that's necessary to feed ordinary consciousness and make you go right ahead in the days. Go ahead right as you should be. Now to offer you some new, at least watercolor sketches on top of the original maps that I've used about the three forces and the three ways I've changed the names around. You've got to remember, if at all possible, as hard as this is, you've got to remember to tell yourself to remember. So you can't weasel out that easy. That to call the forces anything. And in times past, those of you who've been around this long, you know that we went through sort of a primary grammar school stage of me. Since it fit certain purposes, I said that you could call them C, D, and E. And I even pointed out that if you knew what you were doing, or to get you started, you could look over, there's one of the forces seems to be constructive, and then one seems to be destructive, and then one seems to be, after I finally got around to talking about it, irrelevant. It is all, and I'm going to say it is all relative, but it is relative in a way that would give Einstein the dizzies. It's relative in a four-dimensional sense. It's not relative in some figure of speech manner that I'm dragging out. It is absolutely relative, and that. I guess I'll go back to one example I know that everybody's familiar with. Your great progenitors, coming from those questionable areas of Europe, showing up on the shores of North America, chopping down trees, chopping down Indians, building up little things, writing their names on rocks and trees. It seemed to be C, a new life, the manifest destiny of these new people. But had you been an Indian, it does not seem that way. It would seem that these people, your forefathers and foremothers showing up, to them would be D force. That's simple. Don't overlook it. It simply is. And it's not either right or wrong. It's according to where you are looking from, or from where you're looking. Then we could say that if we found, back in the early 1600s, if we ran over to Mongolia and asked them, what do you think? Let me tell you, there's a whole bunch of Europeans. And they're going over to this they've discovered this new land. Looks like maybe a whole continent over there. And they're all going over there, and they're trying to take it over and putting down flags and hollering it's for King George and King James and Queen so-and-so. And there's some people already there. They're kind of like you, not you people, they're kind of backward. They don't have boats and they don't have gunpowder. And they're telling the people, don't get so close to us. Go back where you came from. And when they do that, then these people from Europe, that's just east of you, or just west of you people, I don't guess you've been there, but they're having to get aggressive with them. They're having to kill them. Sometimes what they're having to do. What do you think of all that? That's a long way around. And I would suggest to you that good, just hoi polloi, or even middle class Mongolians at that time would have went, who cares? All right. So from there, a Mongolian's view of what was going on between the European settlers and the Indians was, somebody told me, I heard you described something. I never heard of Europeans, I never heard of this new continent, but you tell me there's some people taking over a new place, and they're beating up on the people that are there, and those people are more backward, and they don't want them to, and you're saying this looks like some kind of progress. I'm just taking your word for all this. I'm taking your word. I never heard of all this. I'm not even sure what you're talking about. But if everything you told me is true, so what? All right. Now you got to be able to see this, not think that I went through all that just to put forth some philosophy I made up or to get a laugh. This is a fact. This is not true. This is correct. And without some kind of continuing awareness down in your nervous system, not just up in the yellow circuits, not just info that you picked up from me as a theory, without that, nothing ever makes sense. All right. What I promised was I want to give you a new, at least watercolor sketch, an overlay of the original kind of maps I was using. Think about the three forces. Well, remember, they're not actually forces. From one place, it looks like a force. To the Indians, it looked like an unholy force washing up on our shores. To the European settlers, the Indians looked like a kind of destructive, resistant force. Here we are. We could help you if you people, leave us alone till we get settled. Hell, we'll share the wealth and all that. From any view, it looks like a force, from one view toward another. But now, let me give you a new sketch of it. Think about what I've been calling the three forces, which are here. They're not forces, I repeat to you, and they're not individually constructive, destructive, or irrelevant. Do I have to go any further? Most of you have heard some of that. I can take this whole thing and turn it. I can start talking. This is not the Albanians or the Mongolians forever. I could suddenly drag the Mongolians, and I could make up or move up in history a little bit and tie them into them. Apparently, there's some belief in this. They're from that same areas where the American Indians originally came from. So the Mongolians could, let's say that they've heard some of that information, and hey, the kind of people they're pushing around are some of my forefathers. I know, we finally got some cards. They moved down to that place. It can be shifted, but from any one spot at any one time, the other so-called forces look like forces, but they are not forces. It is reality. It has characteristics, and from some view outside this characteristic, I'm doing good. Somebody's opposing me. Somebody's always opposing you. Something's always opposing you, and it seems to be a resistance, a destructive force, as a matter of fact. And of course, ordinary consciousness, this is just, they don't know what to make of it. If I, again, was foolish enough to get up and try to present this to the public, and I'd have to point out, all right, everything that seems not to be unconnected to your problem, that's what I mean by the E. And they'd go, hey, now I got it. Now, thanks a lot. That's a brainstorm, and that really helped me. You're saying that there's a force with anything that doesn't have to do with my problem. I got my hands full of this damn problem, and you're telling me that I'm not taking into consideration another force. I gave you a few seconds. Now you tell me the force is everything that's not connected with my problem. But it can be shifted. It is truly relative in a 4D sense. But the sketch, the new overlay I was going to whip upon you, rather than it being looked at as being forces, how about this? What I've been calling the three forces, how about the simple three dimensions of three-dimensional existence of height, breadth, and width? I'm saying how about it overplaying a rhetorical question. I'm telling you it could be used, and I could have, but it would have started off at another level. You can see the reality. The triadal reality supporting everything as simply being, if it exists, it's got three dimensions. Three ordinary dimensions. It's got height, it's got breadth, and it's got width. And that's it. There is good, evil, and indifference. There is C, D, and E. There is apparent positive, negative, and that which is not charged. It is there, if you can see it. Well, I was mentioning characteristics the last time we met. And I've already pointed out what might be the most common characteristics of things that exist, and that is, the most common characteristics is that things have characteristics. If they don't have characteristics, they don't exist. All right? Now you understand that we're into a second hand of betting. So I'm going to up it. Can you see, I can say tonight, since tonight is not night before last, I can say that perhaps the most common characteristics of things that exist is simply this: they have three dimensions. If they don't have three dimensions, they exist. And don't tell me that something written on a piece of paper is two dimensions. Right. The paper. Everything that exists is in three dimensions. Man is not conscious of it if it's not in three dimensions. The three dimensions are a kind of topographical reality of the old idea of Hindu tripartite gods, or the Christian idea of Father, Son, and some Holy Spirit. Throughout these dreams of philosophical systems, throughout low mumblings of life's body that arises and sounds like they're on the verge of talking about a tripartite structure that's supporting all reality. If nothing else, they are talking about the absolute physical dimensions of height, breadth, and width, or things wouldn't exist. Dreams would not exist. The idea of there being God somewhere, that's not something sans dimension. What man calls imagination has dimension. You do not believe it? I can do away with your imagination. Any clumsy surgeon can. Let him do exploratory surgery on your, what do you call it out there? Brains. And all they got to do is hit a certain part and pull it out, and it's in three dimensions, I assure you. Your brains are not a sheet of paper. I know some of you worry, but trust me, even your brains come in three dimensions. And there will be your imagination. Somebody can hold it in your hand. They can hand it around to a scrub nurse. They could drop it in the floor and somebody step on it. I like the way everybody laughs and then look at some of these things. You laugh and look off, like some of you trying to be, I guess, you don't mean this willfully, but I could say that some of you are almost being complimentary, like, wow, that's funny because nobody in the world, I bet, except good old you would have thought of that, and then you look off like it's all over. It'd be all over the floor. Your imagination. By your imagination, I'm including everything. Beliefs that people have talked to gods. Your belief that there is a God. An old something somewhere outside the system. That's three-dimensional. Because it can be cut right out of your brain physically. The gray matter, it can be cut out, held in a hand, and thrown in the slop jar. And there went God. You'll never think about God again. Never. Never. There it was, and it's three-dimensional. Imagination has three dimensions. Anything that exists to man has three dimensions. By the three dimensions, man is continually measuring the characteristics of everything, of life itself, of things, and of himself. Although I am alone in giving you this description for the time being, it is through, although unrecognized as such, it is through the reality of the three dimensions of everything, including imagination. Simple three dimensions. Forget all ideas of C, D, and E. Height, breadth, and width. It is only through those characteristics that man measures everything, thinks about everything, feels about everything. Everything you feel has three dimensions to it. You could not be conscious of it. It would not exist. It would have no characteristic unless it has those three characteristics of height, breadth, and width. It has a molecular structure or it does not exist. And the characteristics of which no one can escape once you see it, but it's like me pointing out that everything's molecular. Last year, the very latest, I guess, a whole lot of you went, oh, wow, oh, yeah. You know, when's the last time that you remembered it? Unless I bring it up. That everything, nightmares, daydreams, my love of my mother, my suspicion of my girlfriend, my hatred of my stepfather, it's molecular. It's as molecular as you having fat ears. Same thing. Human consciousness is not wired up for reasons that some of you might suspect sometimes, except I think as we let Kyrut point out Monday night, that there's been some very careless canards thrown about through history, at least Kyrut said, of some people here and there has taken would-be little revolutionists and said, what if this secret, the missing data, what if it's not all that secret? It's only secret because people, everybody's thought of it, in a sense saw it, measured it at least once, and it was so ridiculous, forthwith everybody forgets about it, and that's it. Everything that you can think of, you are measuring, and you are measuring it beyond any sense of good and evil. I like and I don't like, although you can still be thinking that, not any doubt. What you are measuring is by the characteristics of it, the basic characteristics from which there is no escape, and that is the height, the breadth, and the width of it. And people in the city, people who do not know the language, people who do not know how to think correctly, how to even use the yellow circuit at a bare minimum speed, they continue to call it things like, dislike, which there's the first two, there's height and breadth. Or that's good, or that's evil. There's height and breadth again. Or this is true, but that is false. All right, you got two dimensions. Don't you see why no one is satisfied? Because they cannot correctly calculate what's going on. There they are in a 3D world, and everything, apparently in the world of consciousness, the world of human thought, the very area in which man finds himself and seems to be, singular, in that very area, he cannot take into account the complete measurements of anything. And I don't mean just out here, just this podium. What he thinks about, what he feels about, he cannot correctly measure. If anyone is interested in little things, little minefields and etc., it's of no great importance, but every now and then I decide to do this since it came to my mind and my mouth's already moving. I think it was about a year or so I allowed that rascal Kyrut, I didn't go back and look at it, and so I'm not going to quote it, but it was in the midst of just a regular 25 or 30 of the Kyruts who were read one night within the last year or so. Kyrut said something along these lines, that if you knew what you were doing, or if a real revolutionist was involved, he could take an object of which you had two dimensions, a three-dimensional object, and by knowing two of them, he could tell you what the third one was. It was about that short, and it just went through. Nobody, if you thought about it at all, you had to think, well, that has got to be one of the world's stranger allegories, because that's not possible to start with, so it's obviously an allegory, a metaphor of some kind. You'd have to be dealing in the 2D world. You'd have to be doing in the world of flat geometry, triangles. But out here in the world, to know two dimensions of a three-dimensional object and say, well, from those two you can tell the other three, the third one is patently, if I may be so literary, ridiculous. Because no matter what the height and breadth of something is, you could be either talking about a bread box or an office building. Or you could be talking about your shoe or a Sherman tank. Just because you got two dimensions, that doesn't tell you anything. Now I'm here to tell you that it is possible that if you know what you're doing, a real revolutionist, outside of the limits of ordinary consciousness, if you know two dimensions, which that information's everywhere, you don't need this. You can go to the library, you can go on the street corner. You can probably go look in your pockets in the bathroom. Two of the dimensions, the height and the breadth of everything, the knowledge is just everywhere. But if you know what you're doing, you can take two dimensions of a three-dimensional object and you can calculate the third one. That is insane. That is tridimensional. And I might also add again, for those of you who are interested, the little peaks that seem to jump up in history, that this has happened to people who did not know what they were doing and they were able to calculate. And it just seemed to happen to them. If it just happened once, Some of them made a living reading palms and cards, and yes, there goes Sister so-and-so or Mr. so-and-so. That son of a bitch got some kind of weird, he can tell the future. All he had to do was do it once. I mean, really do it. Not even know what he's doing, but what happens. The so-called mystics of the world, these so-called great instances that somebody did something, foretold the future in such a way that seemed to have changed history, or jumped up and suddenly said something ridiculous and got this whole group of people, went and did it, and it seemed to have, at the very least, a significant, memorable impact on history. Some ways that you can see it, if you can begin to see it, is, for whatever reason, accidentally, you can look at it that way, at one moment, they were able to calculate the third dimension. And under right conditions out there in the city, all you got to do is do it once. It's like it used to be in country music. All you got to do is have one hit and you can make a living the rest of your life. So much for some of your heroes. The height, the breadth, and the width of anything would sound to be, may I suggest, since I made it up, rather cold. It doesn't even have the verbal connotation going along for me to call the three forces constructive, destructive, and then E, or for me to even call them positive and resistant. But to call them height, breadth, and width. But now let me ask you, once I admit that sounds rather cold. Look at your own line level consciousness. Look at the way things are perceived in the city under ordinary binary conditions, binary consciousness under 3D conditions. The characteristics that are perceived by man, why are they all almost passion-provoking? Man does not measure, man does not perceive characteristics of things ordinarily. Let me go back and rephrase it the way I just did it, because I like that one better. Almost all the characteristics that man perceives of things, all the measurements he takes, seem to be almost entirely, passion-provoking. Think about it a second. The things you ordinarily think about, the things you're interested in, the things you're interested in, including you, your problems, your hopes, your dreams, your nightmares, your immediate family, people on the other side of the world, the Mongolians, anything, I don't care what it is, anything you're interested in has got characteristics, or you could be interested in. It's got height, breadth, and width, but it's got characteristics. Why is it that almost all that man perceives under ordinary conditions, all the characteristics provoke passion, when, as I have just pointed out to you, those that hadn't already lost your place, that the characteristics are simply this, that everything that you perceive has height, breadth, and width. That's all that's necessary. And then the ordinary people in the city call it good, bad, up, down, right, wrong, true, false. But all it is height, breadth, and width. Why should that provoke passion? Why should you care? If the latter part of the Middle Ages was this high and this wide and that deep, why should you care if you're wherever it came from? This opinion you seem to have had for years about the Irish should be this high, this wide, and that deep. Why is it when you look at you on a bad day, when you've eaten too much pizza and ice cream for 4 days, that you look in the mirror and what you perceive of you, the characteristics? Don't give me all this stuff that you normally call it. I know all that. What you're perceiving, you look at you and you're this high, this wide, and that deep. Why should that provoke passion? Why should you care? Now the wider question, what is life up to that it takes the dimensions, the absolute dimensions that must be present for things to exist to human consciousness, that is height, breadth, and width, and people are excited by it. People kill for it. They kill each other. They even kill themselves, I hear. Whole bunches of them get together, that's a historical term, and they attack other big bunches of them. And then if that doesn't work out, they'll go back to one-on-one. Over what? Why should characteristics almost entirely? And I got a reason for saying almost entirely, since I normally, as you notice, speak. I guess I can make dogmatic sound like a elementary term. I got my reasons. Why is almost all characteristics of which man perceives to exist seem to provoke passion in the perceiver? Why can you not perceive of something that does not seem to, in its very dimensions, just the dimensions it takes for this thing to exist, this person, this historical event, this institution, this idea you have, the actual dimensions of it, which is what you're perceiving, or you couldn't perceive it, why should you be upset by it? Or why should you be happy by it? Who cares if a shoebox, that the average shoebox is whatever it is, 13 or what, 6 by 6? Why? Of course, I could say, how could it be otherwise, but I'm not going to say that. Anything else, anything less than passion-provoking dimensions, perceptions, would turn everything into what, though? I said I wasn't going to say it, but I'll go ahead and say this, and then I won't say it. It would almost take everything and throw it into an ever-expanding, almost all-consuming pool of E. That everything would then have one dimension. It would be irrelevant. It would be imperceptible. It would be that which had no characteristic. And again, if I were so foolish to jump out in the city and that day ever came, that would make a black hole sound like a real science fiction nightmare. But if that day came, then I would tell everybody, hey, all the perceptions, all the dimensions of life didn't go away. They're over here in the E pool. And if I was that foolish and I talked a few minutes and people could listen, having no basis for perceptions, if they listened at all and they could hear, they'd say, well, describe it to us. And I'd say, well, all reality is in a very place where things don't mean anything. And again, they'd probably say, oh, we've heard about you. We've heard about you talking to us before. Thanks a lot. That's a big help. We really appreciate you showing up here. That explains it all. But that's what it would be at the 3D level. Speaking about the irrelevant, I had a nice note that somebody wrote me. Makes me proud to be in this profession. They said they were sitting in their car. Those of you that always wonder about how to use E, and for whatever reason they didn't go into it, they said they were stuck in traffic and just inching along, just sitting there for long periods of time, and that somebody had some kind of bumper sticker that they said just really annoyed them. They said seriously, to the point that and so they couldn't take their eyes off it, the car right in front. And they said, I suddenly reached over and changed stations on the radio, and it all went. I don't care how you do it, if you just stumble upon it and as soon as you do it, you realize it. Do it. Because how about back in the city, if you told somebody something like that, they'd say, well, especially a psychologist or an intelligent person, well, no. Remember, we're not laughing. I'm not making fun of the city because you got the city in you. I'm saying what your own nervous system, if such as this is pointed out, this is what I'm having to deal with you people and with everybody. Then back in the city, somebody, a thinker, a psychologist, or just a reasonably intelligent person would say, you know, that could be true. Because it's surprising. I have read they've got some new statistical evidence on the effect that music can have on many people's attention span. And then go into that and you can almost go, well, that's true. You could be upset. Because, now think about it, I've done that before. My mother used to do that. She'd say, well, I'm getting the blues, and she'd go on, she had this one record of Strauss waltzes. And I don't know how, but she'd put it on and kind of go da-da-da, and she'd play it, and she'd say, I feel much better now, and she'd go ahead and fix supper. And I've done that before. I put on records and want to hear something real bluesy when I was feeling bad or whatever. That's what's going on. In the city, that makes as much sense as anything. Of course, there's statistical evidence also in the city somewhere, in the anti-city, that says that's a crop. So as always, you got that, whether you see it or not. But it almost comes from the irrelevant. As far as the city is concerned, the answer to say, all right, music can change your mood, it's not that that's not true. But is that some flash of enlightenment? That, wait, I can change the radio, and I was real mad at that person. They had just an offensive, just people like that put that on their car, and yet I changed, I got on another station, and I felt better. That wasn't thanks to the music. All right, it was thanks to the music if you're going to live in the city the rest of your life. It was irrelevant. That's what it was. What in God's name is changing the station on your radio? And the person didn't even say it was music, by the way. And I didn't tell you it was music until I just said that. They could have been listening to a call-in show for all I know. A baseball game. But there's something on the radio. Their nervous system is tied up with these visual, the bouncing of light waves within a certain spectrum that makes them see a bumper sticker, makes them see letters. It goes in here into the nervous system, which has 3 dimensions, and it produces what seems to be a mood, an undesirable state, and they reach over and change the radio. If you know what you're doing, you could have reached over and hit the button to roll all your windows up if they were down. Or you could have reached over, and if all your windows were up, and you're sitting there in traffic and it's 98 outside, reach over and turn off the air conditioning. It's the great beauty. It is the untapped reservoirs of breadth. E. All right, while I'm talking about characteristics, let me see if I can drag you while we turn over the tape. Characteristics. Since I've already given you 2, talking about what might be the most common characteristics. I gave you one Monday and another one tonight. All right, here's another one. This might be the most common characteristics. And I'm pointing out that I've already given you 2 that I've said might be the most common to try and encourage you. Not to go, hey, I thought Monday you said this might be the most common. Not to encourage you to do that. And certainly not to encourage you to go, wait a minute, he contradicted himself. Those both can't be true. That's like saying that something can't be 10 feet high and 5 feet wide. All right. This might be the most common characteristic. The perception that things don't work. Would you at least agree to this just immediately, upon first blush, that that's got to be a real common one? The perception of almost everything. Or I could put it to you several ways. The perception of almost everything at one time or the other by you. And at times when you were not having that perception, somebody next to you was. Somebody was measuring it a different way. That is, that things are not working. Whatever the things are involved. The person in charge of the checkout counter here. The institution of the church. The institution of our local government. That things, whatever you perceive them to be, it's something. No matter how simple or how complex. It is something that has dimensions and it has characteristics. And what seems to be one of the most common perceptions, the most common characteristics of things, that is, they don't seem to be working. That's a fact. Now, you intrepid 4D topographical explorers, shouldn't you find that extremely interesting? That apparently one of the most common characteristics, as long as we've had history, that is, we're perceiving things and writing them down, and some other group comes along after us, some other group, and perceives what they wrote. Talks about it, writes on top of it, critiques it, adds to it, subtracts from it. Throughout it all, one of the most common characteristics is at every time that, hey, things aren't working. What could be going on? One place, let me point out, that nothing is complete for 3D perception. If it was, it would disappear. An example I still like is that things are not in the city, the 3D consciousness, things are not produced in life, invented, discovered, put together, apparently by people, to succeed at their stated purpose. the example I was going to say that I still like. If that were not so, just glaringly so once you see it, it would not, at any given time in our lifetimes, be a third of the New York Times bestsellers, the 10 books, diet books. The reason they continue to sell is they don't work. If there was such thing as a diet book that worked, there'd been one. It'd still be the seller if there was any demand for it. One book. You'd read the one that somebody else had already read. Everybody'd be reading the same book. They do not work. It's why they succeed. But from one view, nothing works. The church, whatever church it is, if they worked, they'd be out of business. If psychiatry worked, its ostensible aim is to make everybody where they don't need a psychiatrist, then all the psychiatrists, be hanging around street corners mugging people. They'd be out of work. So from one view, what I want you to see, that's not where I was going tonight, but there is in the human nervous system, as it comes out in the higher circuitry, the perception, one of the most common perception of everything, family units, romances, businesses, courtesy among people, our social fabric, our institutions. If there's one thing to be said that will apply to all of them, what would probably be the most common thing that could be said? And that is, they're simply not working. Now, of course, the tacit part is they are not working as I and many other people, as many other nervous systems are wired up, they're not working as we perceive the aim to be. So, we have human nervous systems in the life of body for a good 5,000 or 6,000 years that we got some little trace of them scratching on rocks or each other, that, hey, things are not working here in the caves. We tried to band together and put somebody in charge of looking after the campfires or guarding all of our food when some of us are off, or guarding our women. No matter how we try to arrange it, things ain't working. The apparent aim of things, the apparent aim is not being reached. To would-be revolutionists, they should find this very interesting. For 6,000 years, all of the technological progress, health's improved, we're living longer, looking better. You just have to trust me on that. It's a better life, it's easier to live, it's easier to raise families and flowers and health. And yet there is a perception in me and my own nervous system that I can sit down here and read some down-in-the-beard philosopher in Athens 3,000 years ago saying things aren't working, and I can sit here and read it. No, it's 3,000 years old, and they're apparently the characteristics that they start describing is a little different. They're walking around in sheets and they don't have cars and all that. But then he starts talking about how things are not working, and it's as though I am somewhere internally, in my imagination, in my soul, and whatever you'd call it. It is as though I am suddenly swept into confluence, or swept back with this person, because I feel that way. God, how weird. I almost feel philosophical, because I'm going to say, hey, things hadn't changed that much. But you people should find it interesting that in one dimension, at least, things have changed that much. It would be foolish to compare a life right now, ordinary city life right now, to city life in Athens 2000 BC. Foolish. And yet, there is a common characteristic, a common perception that things weren't working then and things aren't working now. All right. Do you not see again an interesting possibility that a third dimension is not being measured, never measured, the piece of missing data? The one that's never, and when I say it, and I've said it before, it might surprise all of you again, when I say it, of course I got you hypnotized and drugged and tricked enough right now, the whole bunch of you here in other places will go, well sure, that's obvious. But it's not obvious, and what I'm going to point out is the unseen part of just a verbal possibility is things don't seem to be working. That is, the goal is not being reached for what seems to be the purpose of this, whatever it is. How about this possibility? The apparent aim, no matter what it is not the aim. the apparent purpose of the family, the apparent purpose of romantic love between people, the apparent purpose of sex itself, the apparent purpose of religions. And if I ask anybody in the city, what's the purpose of religion? What's the purpose of school? What's the purpose of education? What's the purpose of laws? What's the purpose of prisons? Everybody would say, well, I can tell you. Then if I say, well, how the purpose is being served? People say, well, I don't know. Things don't seem to be working the way we imagine they would. What if the aim, what if the purpose of the thing is not the stated purpose? Now I say stated, remember there's no such thing as culture. There's no such thing as out there. You're not being tricked. There's not some conspiracy going on in the outskirts of Rome or in Mongolia to delude people. There are those who think they are, but they're being deluded on another level that is grand indeed. They don't even throw a ball for that annually, but trust me, it is grand. The delusion is going on by life itself. Constantly. It's not you. You hadn't been taught that. Your nervous system. And you seem to be in concert with many people, assuming that you pass for being middle-class sane. That the purpose of, whatever, fill in the blank, the purpose of religion is so-and-so. The purpose of government is, the rightful purpose, of course, the proper purpose of government, religion, love, family life is this. And then you name the payoff. There's the prize. That should be the end of the game. It's to see that the stated purpose that life has made men believe in concert. Many, well, I say in any given area, when I say in concert, that is, the majority of people would agree that yes, the purpose of government is such and such, the rightful purpose. Nobody's ever considered in some way, we haven't been cursed by the gods to live a life of futility, to live a life of having to work down the mines. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not. But there's even another one. If there's gods outside of here and we made them mad, what they've done is they have deluded us from the word go. From the most basic stuff of sex, romance, getting ahead in life, being somebody, then getting together in organizations, institutions, and trying to even make it better for everybody else. And everything just has an unquestioned aim. We've always accepted it. What if that's the big curse? I'm not saying it is, because it's not a curse. But the big delusion is simply that the aim of everything is not the stated aim. And there's nowhere else to look. Unless you're going to get another measurement, but the other measurement is simply going to be the anti-aim. You can't get another measurement in the city. That is, I guess I'm going to make that a little clearer if I can, and I can if you listen. It's not that somebody says, or that the majority of the people in your part of life's body says and agrees, and your system does too, that the purpose of religion should be to help man do better, to help man live a moral life. Everybody goes, okay. There is no other information available, and that doesn't count to find a few people somewhere, a few part of life's body somewhere that would say, all right, the purpose of religion is not to make man more moral. You people are nuts. You people are being fooled. The purpose of religion is to make man worse. That's not new knowledge. That's not another dimension. That fits into the two dimensions always available. That there seems to be the common perception and then the anti-perception. What is missing, that is not available anywhere, there's nowhere to look, is why this question has never arisen in the human nervous system. That is, that the reason we never make the payoff, that none of our institutions, none of us individually, none of our aims ever reach the final payoff, is because it has been put in us that there's an aim to any given thing, to do this, and the payoff will be such and such, and all the way down the line, without exception, somebody has messed up the cards backstage, and Vanna White came back, or whoever it is, and they put up the payoff of this game is such and such, and it's impossible. It's like you're playing Wheel of Fortune, and the payoff is down the road somewhere if the price is right. You play one game, and the payoff never happens. Not because you're dumb, not because of any of the known reasons. What if it is what I've just said? That the payoff, not that you've been told. If you got a real childish nervous system, you may blame it. You think you've been told. You were told it by some other nervous system with the same DNA background that you have, that the purpose of such and such is this. And that the payoff has been misnamed forever. That's one way to look at it. I can tell you another way that the payoff, given the best descriptions available to human consciousness, the payoff is lacking one measurement. And so people have different views. All right, the payoff is going to be the payoff for living a good moral life, the payoff for not drinking, the payoff for being a good Catholic, being a good Jew. The payoff is 10 Umber Trumps high and 60 Glatmos wide. All right, you can say that, and there can be large groups of people already wired up, and they go, that's it, that's it. That can never be reached because you won't know when you get there. There is no such thing as perfection. It cannot be completed. This payoff cannot be reached. It has not been properly measured. But consciousness believes, right, I hear you. The payoff, the purpose of a family is to do so-and-so. The purpose of working hard in life is so-and-so. And it's not. And it's not simply, as I put it to you, that some of you found some favor with that you can look at it as being a kind of mass delusion. Not that just life is trying to dickle around with your brain, although it may be. That it's not simply that you're being deluded, you and everyone else. How about that the only information available is that information, and as always, it's lacking. It's one dimension short. So you cannot reach that goal. And again, if you follow me for the last couple of meetings, if some way you did, you wouldn't know it. If something can be completed, it disappears. It would go from height and width to the breadth. It would go from either C and D back to the E. If it seemed to have been completed by you. Who thinks about the yard once you get it cut? Who thinks about that you finally get the car tuned up? Well, don't tell me that you think about it 5 minutes later. It becomes irrelevant. Plus, you can also hear anything that you can even apparently fix in the 3D world ain't going to stay fixed, because you don't cut the grass once in your life and it stays cut. And you do not fix your car, you do not tune it up once and that's it. You don't tune up people once and that's it. Let me give you another little way that you can look at why things don't seem to work. Is you have one person, one observer, measuring, which is, in one sense, expecting. But he measures, or she measures, one dimension of something. A person, a historical event, an idea, a possibility, an institution, a city, a group of people. One person takes one measurement. Let's say that it's height. Another person seems to have a similar interest, and they take a measurement of it, an expectation of it. They happen to measure the width of it. It can't be seen by ordinary consciousness, but if it could be seen in a certain war, people have been killed over that. Wars have been started over that. Religions have apparently gone at loggerheads over that, which surely some of you are getting good enough to know now religions and governments are the same thing. But there seems to have been great impacts made upon the course of history over what seemed to be theoretical, theological, territorial, philosophical, religious, economic, and whatever else I'm leaving out, conflicts. There is a real way in which you can see, if you can get above the city horizon, that it is a matter that one person, one group of people took something, the idea of government, the apparent purpose of religion. They measured it, and they measured the height of it. And somebody across the street, across the river, looked at the same thing, they thought, and they measured the width of it. And it just so happens, things in the city seem to come very scarce, coming in box sizes. So what you have is always a slightly, at the very least, different measurement. And they don't know what they're doing. For them to perceive of it, they had to measure it. For them to perceive of it, it had 3 dimensions, and they measured one. Somebody else measured another dimension. And it doesn't have to just produce wars and deaths among individuals. It produces conflicts and understanding. It just produces discussion, and all of this, of course, can happen within the one person. In the city, people are driven. It is part of what keeps life alive. If you understand a little apparent lightness when I throw it in, it almost seems to make life interesting. And that people are absolutely driven to be measuring different aspects of what is in truth an unseen and an unseemed reality. Because me saying that nothing exists, even your own imagination, even your own thoughts, without three dimensions, without actually having a height, a width, and a breadth to it, need I remind you again that people alive on this planet that look ordinary have and can still not only see a continuation, a constant 3D-ness of life, but a 4D-ness, that are not wrapped up in robes and do not have halos around their head, that it can be seen whether you ever see it or not. So what I'm telling you is that even after you have gotten down and have some feeling that there is a 3D reality and that people, the apparent movement of energy through conflicts between people, through apparent conflicts of ideas, that even when you begin to have some sensation that there is an actual three-dimensional reality to all of this, and that once you can take into account, just sometimes, once it seems to begin to, and this is not materially correct, but as though this information seems to have now begun to permeate in some way in your nervous system, or begin to bubble up, or begin to get activated in your nervous system, that there is a triad supporting everything. Remember this, correct, but as though this information seems to have now begun to permeate in some way in your nervous system, or begin to bubble up, or begin to get activated in your nervous system, that there is a triad supporting everything. Remember this, that's just the first stage. That's really just kindergarten. Because that whole thing is floating in the soup of something else. It's floating in the soup of time to start with, but then the three dimensions of everything, including your imagination, and time is floating in the soup of something else. It can be seen, or it has been seen, and is still seen by at least one person I know about on this planet now, right now, that there is still one more kettle of soup, that all of that's floating in. Everybody is attempting, it's life doing what it's doing, to be measuring the same thing. Because the reality, when I say it's seamless, even a box, nobody thinks about it this way, but the fan, to start measuring the height and the width and the breadth, there is no end to it. The height simply turns into this. Can you see? The height simply doesn't go up if that is whatever it is, 19 inches or whatever. It doesn't go up here and suddenly stop. Not unless you've got a real limited sense of consciousness. But if you're talking about it piecemeal, if you're measuring piecemeal, then the height seems to be 19 inches, period. Or at least comma, and now width is, whatever it is, 19 inches. And then we go into comma, breadth. The depth of it is 7.5 inches. The reality is, it goes up here and it simply turns a corner. Now, consciousness calls it something else. It measures it in a different way, but in a sense, there is no separate height, width, and breadth anymore. There's a separate C, D, and E. It's all together. It's all floating in the soup of time, which is floating in something else. But everybody is measuring, which is the way consciousness is, they're simply measuring one at a time. And the best they can come up with is, right, there are two dimensions to everything. That is my measurement of it, and the incorrect measurement. That is, my measurement of this is 19 inches. And don't tell me I'm completely dumb, because I'm aware of the fact there are at least two measurements of everything. The second measurement of this is anything that's not 19. That's the second measurement, which in effect is D again. False, wrong, stupid. In fact, people like that, I'd like to punch them in the nose. Anybody tell me, I got to measure that 3 times, I showed them. I said, it's 19 inches, and somebody said, no, it ain't. So you do have two dimensions, the right one and the wrong one. That won't get you anywhere. It's not right or wrong. It's when you've got less than the bare minimum, the calculations of 3 dimensions, you can't understand anything. It does not even exist in a way that even the city consciousness is practical. Well. It's that famous group, not an individual, but that famous group that I'm sure a few of you are familiar with that has been in college in the last decade. That group of philosophers, the fabulous Thunderbird said, I believe tonight's been tough enough, so I was considering stopping. That was the title of my album. They stole it. I don't mean my album. That was the title of my philosophy, and they used it for their album title just to keep it straight. But I'd already checked that out with a few people to really tell you the truth, that was going to be the name of my new philosophy, was called Tough Enough. And I checked it out on a few college campuses, and I didn't get much of a favorable reaction. So, come think about it, I guess it's just as well they used it. In conclusion, a couple of things I mentioned I want to unfold just a little bit more. One is me talking to you about how there's a certain kind of self-protection that a real revolutionist must ultimately use, and it was a kind of controlled, willful anger. And then I even said it was a kind of perfected anger. And then I even said it was a kind of perfected sovereignty over anger. Let me unfold it another step. To learn how to do this, and this is a kind of information before the ability necessarily on some of you people's part, but I know that some of you would be wired up that you got a hard time even wrestling with the informational part. This kind of perfected use, and anger is not the word, hostility is not the word, but I used them for certain purposes initially. But this kind of perfected use of that kind of feeling is not in any way whatsoever, is it harmful or hurtful toward the other person apparently involved. That is, I started out describing that you're trying to protect yourself from what seemed to be a disagreeable situation between you and another person. It is in no way whatsoever hurtful to them. Contrary, what it does, in a 3D sense, in a city sense, what it does is to stop you from actually hurting them through your feelings. It is not that you, even though the first night I used it, you remember, I was saying it was a kind of willful, controlled hatred. It's not that you hate the person. What you're doing by using this kind of perfected anger, a kind of blue circuit abandonment of them, is to stop the possibility, the distinct possibility of hating them. That is, assuming you could do this, and then you let go of the perfected, this hold, this controlled, willful wrath toward them, as I was describing it initially. If you did let it go, you'd be right where you would have been anyway. That is, you are hating them. But by being able to do this, you refrain from hating them. It is not harmful, it is not hurtful in any way towards somebody you use this with. A lover, an ex-lover, your mother, your father, somebody that's almost a stranger that to you did something quite despicable to you at one time. This kind of controlled, willful anger, this kind of perfected dominion over the reality of anger that's in humans, rather than it being condemnable as life has made it in everyone else, the way it's exercised, once you know how to control it and use it, it is a beautifully constructed weapon. People don't know they've been hit by it. They're never hurt by it. On the contrary, it stops them from being hurt by you. It could stop literally from you physically hurting somebody. That's not why I brought it up. But it stops you in the ordinary city sense from hating them, of talking about them. Every time you think about them, you hate them. It stops it. They've been hit by a weapon that, unbeknownst to them, made them feel better. At least it didn't hurt them, which you would have done had you not been able to do this. That's what makes it such an extraordinary weapon. It's unknown, and it flies completely in the face of the dimensions that have been measured in the city. That is, I've already pointed out that life in general, religions, philosophies, humanistic ideas, throughout history, condemning hostility and hatred. And it just is in almost everyone's nervous system. The bourgeoisie, if not the hoi polloi of all of humanity, the nervous system goes, yeah, that's true. We got to do something about hostility, anger. In fact, that's one of the reasons things don't work. There is a way to use it, like everything else. Of course, there's a way that you first see that my conception, that is, human conception of anger, is as flawed and incomplete as my perception of what's funny is. And what'll make a flyable situation comedy. It's always incomplete. The term I did use, and I just brought back up, was a kind of blue circuit. That is, city terms, a kind of emotional, but it's got to be complete now. That's why I was using blue circuit instead of just emotional. But it's an emotional abandonment of the person, of the situation, but it oftentimes appears to be literally limited to this person. It was my mother that did this. I don't see any ramifications outside her that made her do that. My feeling is this mistreatment had its source in her. She is the source of this. So it's the abandonment, the blue circuit abandonment of the person to keep you from hating them, to keep you from falling into the unprofitable, mechanical, emotional dance with the person that's necessary in the city. Everybody hates their mother. And those that don't love their mother, and it's the same thing. In those days they don't love her, they hate her. They got one dimension of their mother. They got one dimension of their lover, their father, themselves. The blue circuit abandonment, I was going to bring you a little more unfolding of that, at least in the form of a question. This kind of perfected, controlled anger, this kind of blue circuit abandonment toward an adversary, toward someone who has harmed you. Can you see any way that a real revolutionist could use this in relationship to their own partnership? To abandon, to blue circuit abandon that which seems to be your internal adversary. Yeah, but that ain't the way to change. The way to change is to really get a grip on yourself, to look yourself dead in the eye in the mirror and say, you sorry sot, you got to quit drinking. You got to get up and go to church more. Well, I guess you got me. There's no doubt that's the way to do it. That's why things change. I mean, nothing breeds success like success, right? That's why everybody does that. That's why I just told you is wrong. Because in the city, if you're going to deal with yourself, if you're going to improve yourself, you got to look yourself dead in the eye and say, all right, you. And that's why there is such unbridled success with that. Or, of course, from another viewpoint, that's why apparently things are broken. Because that doesn't work. It doesn't work if you do it through religion, hypnosis, subliminal tapes, taking yourself by the scuff of the neck and say, look here, you. By having a good talk with yourself, by asking your mother to have a good talk with you, none of it is working. That's why it's such a success. That's why everybody continues to do it. It doesn't work. What if you could find out how to use this kind of perfected dominion over anger toward you? I've given all through the last several years all kinds of little things to do in the morning, little temporary excursions about to get up in the morning and say something to yourself, to put a note on the bathroom mirror. I've even stood around at parties with some of you and made jokes, and many times I'll let Kyrud apparently make jokes at his own expense. It was all about the same thing. Because there's no way to directly say it. I'm getting close now as far as it's possible with the limited dimensions that you can make with verbal communiques. that there is a kind of perfected, a kind of controlled wrath, great aggression toward one's own partner, but which is, after a slice you can put, also a kind of blue circuit abandonment. But it's everything that everyone in the city believes it's not. Because in the city, if you're going to do something about yourself, you got to face up to your problems like an alcoholic. You got to stand up in the meeting and say, I'm an alcoholic. Or at least you got to go in the bathroom, look yourself in the mirror and say, I can't keep beating up on my wife. I can't do this. What's wrong with me? Or you get up in the morning and look at your eyeballs and it looks like, you know, map of New Jersey. I got to quit drinking. I'm late now. I'm probably going to lose my job. I have got to do something. Well, what you got to do? Well, if you're 40, you've got to, for another 32 years, you got to dance. You and the part you're talking to has got to dance. You got to keep running around with one measurement of this thing you call you in this case. Remember, I pointed out to you, people are measuring life, things, that is apparently out there, and themselves. So you're going to run around dancing, and you're going to run around as though you had, I guess it would be a combination of well, you would simply have a one-dimensional measuring device. And you're running around and you're measuring everything, including you, with this one measurement. And it can never prove profitable. Let me leave this part back to the question as I originally put it. Can you see any possible use, any relationship between this kind of blue circuit abandonment or / perfected control of anger / blue circuit abandonment? Can you see any possible use and connection between that and your perception of your own internal life, the perception of you as a partnership, that there is a bad you, an anti-Elvis, an anti-you that's standing in the way of you doing what you want to do, what you should be doing. Of course, you don't know what the hell that is, but still there's a payoff somewhere. If people knew how to use anger in the city, what would they be doing? I can't resist going 1 or 2 more minutes. This kind of thing some of you like, but I don't do it just to be funny. It's to try and make your little yellow circuits at least go, and like get you know what a Maypop tire is? The tube start, it's so worn down and almost treadless, the little parts of an inner tube, back when cars had inner tubes, kind of wants to pop out. But it's this. If people had this kind of anger at themselves that they say they do, like I was brought up to be a good blank, you know, Catholic, Jew, Christian, and I'm so weak, and evil forces have got me. It makes me so mad because I know without any doubt, I was brought up this way. I can feel it. My forefathers' religion, my mother was such a saintly woman. And sometimes when I'm drunk and I can't, you know, pick up and get any pussy or anything, I just feel so, I'm so filled down, I'll sit down and I'll think, I've got to do better. All right, if there was any validity to that, if there was any reasonably intelligent person in the city, would they not finally say, you goddamn sorry bastard, and they would grab themselves. They would throw themselves on the floor. They'd beat themselves in the head with something. Or they'd grub themselves and say, we're going to mass now. I don't care what goddamn time it is. And they'd reach down their hand and say, there it is, that bottle of booze again. And they'd rip it out of their hand and they'd throw it out the window and they'd slap themselves around. I'm not being funny, although I know you laugh. Anything less than that, how can you say somebody in the city has any intention, assuming they knew what they were doing, any intention of changing? That is, any intention in some way of confronting what's in them that they say, they got to, that they say and that they feel is standing between me and perfection, or at least improvement. And you ask them, they start saying, my temper, my drinking, whatever it is. Why do they not say, wait a minute, I suddenly see the light, and they go in the bathroom and lock the door, take themselves in there, and just beat the living piss out of themselves? Why do they not? Because the aim, the payoff of the game is not what people believe it is. They got to feel like, hey, one of the prime characteristics of everything is that it's broken, it's not working, including me. and I'm not working. Well, I guess we're out of tape. And I'm out of patience. And you could be out of your mind. Well, take 2 aspirin and be here again next week. Try not to wrinkle the couch while you're laying there. Epilogue is flavor. I got an excursion I want to bring back up. I want you to redo this one. This time for 12 days. I got a reason for this. And I want all of you, just because I'm bringing it back up, I want you to do it seriously. Just do it like I say it, and try and keep your eyes open. Try and find something beyond one dimension to this. For 12 days, I want you, as much as humanly possible, to avoid visually, orally, picking up any advertisements. Just try and stay away from it, and for the same 12 days, I do not want you to buy anything unless it is necessary. Don't buy something on sale. Don't buy toilet paper by the gross. Don't buy more. If you need food, buy what you got to have right now. Those of you who can, here's something else. I'm not just going to suggest it. I make this part of the excursion. Now, if some of you have got big families and you've got husbands and wives and children not involved with this, I understand this could be almost impossible. And don't make a big deal about it. Those of you that just immediately when I describe it, if you can't do it, if you realize, well, if you got to explain to anybody, then consider that you can't do this part. The rest of you, I know a lot of you live alone, and a lot of you live with somebody else here in the group. You can do this. And here it is. From now on, I want you to abandon large garbage cans. These things that you buy, and here's what I want you to do. The little plastic bags almost everybody gets now from the grocery store, these little things about this high. Use that as a garbage bag. Take your big thing, the big garbage pail and the bags and all that, and just do away with them. Just store bird food in them, turn them upside down, and put plants on top of it. Under the sink or wherever you do it, take that little small thing, and once a day, take the garbage with you in the morning. When you go out, take whatever garbage you got for that day. That is, every day, take the garbage. Whatever you are throwing away, take it out of your house. Take it as soon as you leave the house in the morning. And I don't want you to put it out front. I want you to take it and I want you to drop it off somewhere else. Put it in somebody else's garbage can. Put it in a dumpster. Throw it down a sewer. The sewers will take care of it. But do not go out and put it in front of your house. Have no more garbage collection at your house. Unless those of you that immediately strike, as I said, that this is, if you got to deal with a family outside of here, you can't do it. But a lot of you can, and I mean it literally, is to do it that way. But to throw it out 7 days a week, you get out of the house and do it first thing. Those of you getting up in the morning and going on jobs or going out to run, take it with you first thing. When you go out of the house, take that garbage for the preceding 24 hours and throw it out and put in a fresh little small thing. And I mentioned I have never gone into this specifically enough to get directly interfering or dealing with you people's fiscal lives, but I keep pointing out allegorically, I'll let Kairoot do it, that you should not be in debt. And I tell you that literally, and I tell you that it's much more than that. I know that some of you are making house payments, or maybe some of you are threatening to buy a house, and it seems like you've got to go in debt for that. And I'll give you that. The rest of it, don't come up with number 2 like a car. You got no business going in debt for a car, I'm telling you. Not a revolutionist. And debt is not an American invention. It's not a 20th century invention. It is not a capitalistic trick being played upon us. It's life doing it to you. You got no business being in debt. The house I give you, we're not going to fool with that. I know how things are arranged. But anything short of that, you people should not be in debt. You shouldn't even have a credit card unless you look at it as like people used to, as a $20 bill folded up in your shoe or your brassiere, back when people wore shoes and brassieres, and $20 meant something. If you had a credit card, you should not be using it. It should be an emergency. And you shouldn't even get in emergencies. In other words, you should take your credit card probably and just throw it away, period. You should not be in debt. It is not good. It's much more than fiscally, but financially, I'm saying you literally. And some of you should begin to feel this. There are so many other things that can be done. I have never gotten into this, and I doubt that I ever will. That is, insist that, all right, get out of debt and prove it to me. But for me to continually to ring this up, you must know that it has some validity, or else you shouldn't be fooling with me. You should not only get out of debt, you shouldn't have any debts hanging over you. You're to get out of them some way or the other, and never ever get back in debt. If you can't pay for what it is you want, fuck it. Because there is a thing about life. It's not society. It's not some banking conspiracy. It's life doing it. It keeps people in debt. And one way it does it is it keeps them in debt financially. That is, materially, that they can see it and feel it and whine about it and feel like things aren't working. I've worked my whole life, and what have I got? All I'm doing now is paying off the interest on the mortgage. I don't have a cent saved. There it is. Things are broken. And that's one way life does it to people. You not only should be out of debt, but all of you should be spending every week, or wherever you get paid less, you should spend less every week. I don't care if you have to die to do it. Is you should spend less than you took in. Your net, whatever you took in. That is, every week you should have some money left over, and don't go spend it. Every damn one of you should be doing, and I mean something worthwhile to you. You should take it and be saving it. Not for a rainy day and not to help our economy. Fuck a rainy day and fuck our economy. That ain't the point. You don't know what life does to people. You're waiting in line for up on the hill. I told you what's up there. You call it down the ground, but it's up on the hill. And between here and there, you're going in debt. Between here and there, you're worrying about. I'm glad the tape's run out. That's really all I got to tell you. And I don't guess it'll be before another 2 or 3 years I might go back into this, because I know it may sound strange, especially to some of the newer people involved with this, of what in the hell does that have to do with some great, surely you wouldn't still say New Age activity. But what does it have to do with any serious thing, which again is part of life, the way in which it operates? Apparently it's got nothing to do with it. But as always, I don't know how you could be more incorrect, unless you want to go practice. That's really all.